Okay, so I got my paper stretched, it's dried, it's ready to go. We're going to go over a couple of techniques. And before I do that, I'm going to take my palette and I'm going to spray it with some water just to loosen up the paint. So I'm just going to take a spray bottle, spray, 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 get all my colors moist and ready to go before I start painting. Okay. Another thing you guys need to know is that I have my board on an angle tilted towards me because when you work with watercolor, you want the water to run down towards you so you can control it. And we'll explain why in just a little bit. So the first one you're going to be doing is called a solid wash, and it doesn't matter which color you're going to use. Let's say I'm going to use some alizarin crimson here. So just give me a moment to load my brush. Okay, and I want quite a bit of water to just kind of start this. So there's my alizarin crimson. Probably should have let the paint soak just a little bit more. Okay, so a solid wash is basically, or a flat wash, where you have a big, huge area of consistently exact same color. So I loaded my brush, and what I'm going to do is create a line. And I want that water to be running down. You can see that little bead of water starting together. And I'm going to load my brush again. I'm going to do another line. You're just going to keep on going and going and going. And you want to see that little bead of water at the very, very bottom, right there. I'm just going to practice going more and more and more so I have consistently the exact same color happening. Looking for that bead of water. Okay, so let's say I want to stop here. There's my wash. I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to dry it with a paper towel, or in this case I have a Kleenex, and I'm going to suck up this bead of water. So the brush will suck it right up. If you leave the bead of water, it's going to create a watermark. Something I don't want to do when I create a solid wash is, like, let's say I messed up over here and I just get my brush and I go, oh, I need to go over this again. It's going to leave also a watermark. So it's kind of like a one and done sort of situation. Or once this is fully dry, then maybe you can go back over and, you know, do another wash on top of it to fix it. Okay, next one is called a gradient wash. And a gradient wash is basically where you go from dark to light. So let's see, I'm going to use green for this one. So I loaded my brush, doing the same thing. I start with a line, and now I want it to get lighter as it goes down. There's my bead of water at the very base. And to get it lighter, all I got to do is just continuously add water. To the paint that I have. Getting a nice strong bead of water, adding more, slowly getting lighter and lighter and lighter. If I'm getting a little too much water, again, I can just dry my brush, soak up a little bit of that, and then just kind of continue on my merry way. So that's a gradient wash. Probably not the best gradient wash I've ever made, but you know. Okay, soak up the bead of water at the bottom. There we go. Okay, next ones. So wet on dry means you have a dry paper with wet paint. So I'm just going to take my wet paint on my brush, put it on dry paper. Wet on dry. So if wet on dry is dry paper, wet brush, what would wet on wet be? You probably guessed it right. So wet and wet is I'm just going to get some water. I'm going to get my paper wet first. And then I'm going to add wet paint on top of it. So like if I barely touch this, you can see how I get these beautiful soft edges, and let it just bleed. So there's a good example of wet on wet. Dry brush works really well if you have a cold press watercolor paper, which is what this is right here. And basically a cold press watercolor paper has tooth to it. There's a really rough texture, in other words. And if I have like paint on my brush, what I can do is just skim it right across so I get these really rough texture. So that's dry brush. Let's see, glazing I'm going to have to go over a little bit later here. What I'm going to do is get some yellow though. Just create a line. We'll find out why later in just a minute. Okay, let's talk about soft edge. And I don't know if I can move my phone or palette.